Okay, so as I said a couple of weeks ago, we have a wonderful schedule of top speakers involved. This morning is another one. Reverend Dave Schoen has taught classes for us before, so I'm just going to make this very brief and introduce you, Dave. The one thing that we are going to do differently with Dave's classes is he prefers to have questions throughout his class. He will tell you more if he needs to. But just be prepared that as we have different speakers, they have preferences in how they want to manage questions and discussions with their presentation. So with that, I'm going to let Dave take over.
Hang on a moment.
Thank you, Dave, and good morning.
Well, good morning to everybody. Great to see you all, and it's good to see faces that are familiar as well as new faces. So I hope you're having a good morning. It's kind of a gray day out there, so it's great that we can gather like this to talk and support and connect with each other. And I'm going to be talking a bit about maybe some things that you might appreciate, and that's gardening in a time of COVID. I heard people saying as we gathered here that it's been, in some ways, a lonely time. It's been a difficult time. It's also been a time of some new experiences as well and connecting with people. For me, I must admit, it's been a challenging, kind of frightening, worrisome, and wearisome year in many ways, as well as a time of learning new things and learning many ways to do things during this time of social distancing, like staying in touch with loved ones and others, as well as doing things like this. And let me just tell you, Linda, so far it's going well. I have to tell you, this week or two was for my work. I was on a webinar with 90 people, and I was supposed to lead a workshop. And right as the workshop got started, we all were cut off. So you're doing good.
Yay.
So this Zoom meeting, gathering and online worship activities at the church, all ways that we can connect and expand and learn how to support each other in many opportunities. So I'm going to talk about what has helped us during these past months, during these pandemic and social distancing times, as well as everything else that's happening in our nation. Something that's really kept me going during these months is being outdoors in the garden. I've always been a gardener. I grew up in a farm area with lots of gardeners and farmers, and my dad we'd always plant a big garden for vegetables, and my mom was an incredible flower gardener, and we had big flower beds, and she loved roses as well. But I must admit, during these past months, there's been more time than ever to spend in the garden, and it's been a good place to be. The garden has been a place that's brought delight and kept me sane during these months, especially these last 2 months. We had, talking about family, we had our family from Seattle come and live with us for 2 months, and we don't have a really big place, and that includes 2 3-year-olds and an 8-year-old, and it's been a wild, fun, crazy, sometimes loud experience. And the garden was a sanctuary for me. I enjoyed seeing the children go out, and they loved picking berries, raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, apples, even kale. But it also was a place that I could escape to for quiet listening and watching and thinking and learning. Perhaps you also are gardeners. How many of you have been working out in gardens these past months? All right, good to see you. Well, we'll talk some more about that. And you know, we are not the only ones. As I walked around the island on my morning walks every day, I could see that there were lots of gardeners. There are lots of folks out working on their gardens. There are lots of gardens that were looking pretty well taken care of. And not only are we not the only ones here on the island, but it was interesting to see that starting in February and March, if you tried to order seeds online, places were sold out of seeds. Everybody across the nation not only found sourdough this time, but also found planting and gardening. And so seeds were in hot demand online. I don't know if you all know this, but we now also have our own seed company here on the island. Seattle Seed moved here to Whidbey Island and have their corporate office and their plant in Clinton. And they're a great group of folks. They do organic seeds, non-GMO seeds, and good packaging. And you can order them online and get them from right here on Whidbey Island. So this morning, I want to talk more about gardening during this time of COVID and some lessons, some learnings from the garden. Of course, gardening is nothing new. Planting seeds and sowing seeds, growing plants is nothing new for humankind. We've been doing it for about 12,000 years, starting back in 10,000 BC. People started not just picking seeds, but planting seeds. And in 9,000 BC, barley and wheat and flax were being grown in the Fertile Crescent. In 8,000 BC, potatoes were being grown and raised in South America. In 7,000 BC, sugarcane and root vegetables were being planted in New Guinea. And in 6,000 BC, rice was being planted and grown in China. So we've been about gardening and planting for a long time. And in fact, the gardens that I kind of lived into here on the island, I did not create my gardens. Both the flowers and the fruits and the vegetables were here on the island waiting for me. And we were glad to find this property when we moved here 5 years ago. One of the things we were glad to discover in our home, which is an old farmhouse from about 1905, was that the yard included a greenhouse and 2 garden areas with fruit trees and berry bushes and dahlias and a vegetable patch area. My wife kind of laughed that, so when we retire, we're becoming farmers. But, I've always enjoyed gardening, and this was a great challenge, and it's been a great blessing to be here. The previous owners were gardeners and laid out the grounds and the trees and the bushes for us to enjoy, planting in many ways for the next folks, for the next generations. How do we do that with what we're doing? So in the garden, first thing I'm always reminded, even in this time of COVID, that I start with a sense of thanksgiving. Thanksgiving for the previous owners, for the first settler, the people of the indigenous nations who were stewards and cared for the land long before I ever came here. Had to give thanks for it was a good summer as well. We were thankful that it was a good summer for growing things. It was not too hot. In fact, you could say it was kind of chilly, almost a cool summer. I don't think summer really came to about the last week of August, and just as it was ready to go. Now we've had some nice days in September, even this past week as well. We had good rain as well. Not too much rain, not too little rain. So things grew well, well, most things. How did your gardens grow this summer? Were they growing okay? Cool, good. Well, my garden, lettuce and kale, parsnip, beets, raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, and fruit trees all did fairly well. I won't tell you the ones that didn't, but those did really well. And I particularly enjoyed, I always like to experiment with new things every year. And this year, for the first time, I planted arugula and yellow pole beans. And the arugula just took off, and we have been enjoying pesto all summer. And the pole beans, what a hoot. I mean, I knew they were supposed to grow up high. I just didn't know that they would take off like rockets. I mean, I was putting those little strings down, and it was just fun to watch them go up. And then the first level of things, and I was like building this plane as it flew. The beans were ahead of me and finally I built the poles up above my head, and I couldn't get any higher. And they filled it up with delicious yellow beans this year. I also enjoyed 2 years ago. I planted gooseberry bushes, and do you all like gooseberries? Did you grow up with gooseberries? Yeah, I did. Out in the Midwest, we used to pick them all summer, and some cherry trees to add to that to pass on. And both the cherries and the gooseberries did really well this year. It was fun to watch the grandchildren really get into them. My time in the garden, listening to birds and watching plants grow, harvesting the good fruits and vegetables, reminded me to be thankful, thankful even in these days. And it's good to start the day instead of fretting, to be thankful. It puts a much different spin and a start to the day. As the psalmist in Psalm 19 sings, the firmament proclaims God's handiwork. Being in the garden reminded me every day, in the midst of all the challenges and weariness of these days, to give thanks for and to the Creator of life and all things, the force that has brought forth this earth and the abundance of the land. Walter Brueggemann, a well-known theologian in these past years, said, the best way to get in touch with God is to have your feet and your hands in the soil, in the dirt. So I spent a lot of time in the garden thinking and reflecting on life, theologizing, talking, and trying to listen to God in these past months. It was a good place to do so. You know, it's interesting to note all the mention of gardens in our spiritual tradition, in the biblical tradition. The Creator God planted a garden in Eden and placed humanity in it. And yes, that garden had a snake in it too, Linda. Sorry. The Creator is a gardener. Think of God as a great gardener. And when we are engaged in gardening, we are co-creators with God. We are engaging in that creative process. In the Song of Solomon, a love song, sings about the garden of delight. And the prophets, Isaiah, Amos, Micah, and Jeremiah spoke of gardens. And Jeremiah told the exiles to go plant a garden where they were and get used to being there. But then they all proclaimed, the prophets, that God would bring the people back and that they would be like a watered garden, never to languish. Jesus, of course, went in gardens often and went with the disciples in gardens. And Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane many times, but especially on that night of betrayal. And Jesus was buried in a tomb in a garden. In fact, in Jesus' resurrection, and I love this text in John, Mary comes out of the garden. Remember, she is so upset that she runs into Jesus and she doesn't even recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener. What a wonderful text. Jesus was mistaken for the gardener. In fact, Jesus is a gardener of much peace and strength and nurture for our lives and our communities. Jesus mistaken as a gardener. And I think about that. I think of what that means for us as gardeners and what that means for those that we see garden around us. And I think especially of the many people who do lawn work and garden work in our communities, often perhaps even looked down upon or not even very well noticed. Maybe we're missing Jesus in those folks. Gardener, Jesus mistaken for gardeners, Jesus in the midst and being a gardener. Throughout his ministry, Jesus told stories of gardens and vineyards, planting seeds and growing plants. The parables are those stories. You remember there are many different stories. There are simple human stories, a woman who cleans her house, a sower who goes out to sow seeds, plants growing in the midst of weeds, brothers not getting along together in a family, workers in a vineyard. Jesus told simple human stories, real life situations with lessons and often a twist. The realm of God is like this. And it's kind of a riddle for us to figure out, what is that realm of God like? sower and the seeds, where some of the seeds fall on rocks and some fall on good land and some fall among the birds and some fall among the thistles. One of my favorite one about sowing seeds in the parables is that parable where Jesus talks about a sower who throws seeds out, and the plants grow, but so do the weeds alongside it. Now that sounds like my garden. It sounds completely like my garden. You know, I even got a new cultivator this year, an electric one, which I love, and it's a really sturdy one, worked really well. But it just seems the more I cultivate the land, the more it just seems to spread the weeds out evenly across the whole garden. And I've never experienced this except here in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, really, the weeds seem to outdo the plants, and they grow so fast, and that you really have to distinguish the good seeds, the plants, from the weeds, and kind of, you know, be very careful that you're not pulling out the good seeds while you're pulling out the weeds as well. And that's what happens in this parable. Remember, the owner of the land says, when someone comes up to him and says, well, what are we going to do about all those weeds? Well, he says, well, let them grow, and just make sure when we harvest it that we harvest the good seed, and we get rid of the weeds and don't harvest them. You know, I think about that for our lives. You know, we end up living in the midst of a lot of weeds probably in our lives. There are weeds that we have to deal with constantly. There are the good things that are happening, and there are those things that are not so good. And it'd be nice if we could get rid of all those things, but they are right alongside us. The important thing is to know, what are the good plants? What are the good seeds? What are the good things happening in our lives, and how to be able to distinguish them from the things that are not so good, that are the bad seed, the things that are damaging and difficult. And we have to manage those, but we have to also really nurture the good seeds among us. So the parables often talk about, and let me just check in, are there any comments here yet, James, or any statements that I need to respond to? Yeah, Deanne. James, can you open up Deanne?
I got it. My husband had a degree in horticulture, and he learned in college that weeds are just plants out of place. And I've never forgotten that. Yeah. Weeds are just plants out of place. Oh, and another comment is, you didn't plant any rhubarb? You're from the West.
There's rhubarb growing here.
Okay.
I love it. And honestly, as a kid, I hated rhubarb. I thought it was just, ugh, what is this? And you know what? I find that as long as I grow something, I'll eat it.
Yeah.
It's only good. And yeah, we do have rhubarb. Do a lot of rhubarb and strawberry rhubarb and apple pie. You bet. That's a wonderful comments about weeds, and a good way for us to look at things. In fact, one of my grandchildren came up to me, I think our 8-year-old, and we used the word weeds. And he said, well, what's a weed? And I started to think, well, that's a good question. You know, it's I love your husband's term. It's a plant that's out of place, because I've discovered in weeding around here, not knowing what the plants look like, sometimes I've pulled out foxgloves, and I've pulled out all sorts of things that are actually nice plants, not knowing what they were. And so really the important thing, and perhaps the lesson of that parable, is you have to know what are the good plants, what are the things that are out of place, and be able to differentiate. So the realm of God is like, where do we see God's realm in this time of COVID? Well, I've been thinking a lot in the garden about that, and I've been thinking about picking snow peas. Do you plant snow peas? Well, they grow pretty easily here. In fact, they almost grow too much, kind of overwhelming. And but when you plant them, what I discovered about them the first time I planted them is once they get to the point of maturity, they're awfully big bushes. And when you go down and look for the snow peas, you know they must be there, but it's really hard to see them. It's really hard to tell the difference between the leaf and the pea. And you have to take some time to just stand in front of them and look. So where are the peas? And then once your eyes get accustomed to things, perhaps even when you look at things a little, by the side or whatever, you start to see the seeds. Once you see them, then you can see them clearly and you start to push leaves aside. And not only are there one or two, but there's usually an abundance of them. And then I also learned that I could pick the snow peas, bring them up to the house, put them aside, go back to the garden in an hour or two. And darned if I didn't look at that snow pea plant again. And there were more snow peas. More snow peas. So I thought of this parable of God's realm. It's like, you have to look. And you have to look intently. And you have to work hard at looking sometimes. You have to perhaps push things aside that get in our way of seeing it. But there are those signs of God's realm in our midst. And once you see them, you can see them again and again, but you gotta look. So once a gardener, the realm of God is like this. A gardener who planted snow peas and waited for the snow peas to grow and watched them grow and grow until they finally were ready to give and fruit. And the gardener went down to look for them and stood in front of the plant and couldn't see any peas, but he knew they should be there. But then he looked closer and looked intently for a while and focused and maybe looked a little sideways and maybe pushed the leaves around some, and there were the snow peas. And once he saw one snow pea, you could see many more. And once you went back, after picking the first round of snow peas and went back again, there are even more snow peas. Let those who have ears hear, let those who have eyes see. Parables. God's realm of life and compassion and goodness and justice is with us in this season of COVID. I am reminded of that when I'm thankful and working and looking in the garden. But you have to be attentive. And you have to try to make sure that you are looking for what is good and not getting distracted by those things that are out of place and by fretful, hard things that we are dealing with right now. So let me just ask, how did your garden grow this year? What's your experience of gardening, and what kind of things do you learn while you're gardening? What keeps you and sustains you in the midst of all this? Please feel free to answer.
The one thing about having the pandemic is that many, many times over the last several months, I realized that how crazy busy my life has been, and other people's lives as well, but I can only speak for myself. And when I come up for air, it seems like I always go back to basics. And I grew up with a very large garden. Dad and us kids would help tend to the garden, and Mom would do all of the canning and freezing and doing all of that work. And it's the same thing that's happened now. It's allowed a lot more time to be involved with something that I love to do, but I haven't always made time. So there is a bright side to all of this, even if it is confined to our home. It's been a really wonderful way to be able to connect back into the garden and nature.
I remember growing up in a farm community, a big corn farm community. And my gosh, when the corn came in, we would be deluged with bundles of corn, and we'd spend all night.
I can't see us. I was
Freezing
going
it.
to say something, but I can't see us.
There you are.
Okay, we're unmuted.
And we
I
can
can hear
see
you.
you.
Oh,
We can see you.
you can?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Um, I just wanted to say that our gardening, we moved to this house that we're at now about 3 years ago, and the first 2 summers we didn't really have an opportunity to do much with it, and there wasn't any garden whatsoever. So we have slowly worked at it, and what I recognized from it, a couple of things, one positive and one just a notification. And the positive one is just to watch on a daily basis the difference. And it's so amazing how fast nature is. And you kind of made mention of that, Dave. It's just incredible. And it's a very soothing kind of thing, just a meditative kind of thing, just to see the difference in a day or two. And plus, we're kind of just learning it. So it's fascinating. I mean, Colleen painted these little rocks that we got off the beach with different names of what it was we were growing. And unbeknownst to us, we had the rocks in different spots. So what I thought was hollyhock was something entirely different. And I was going, I don't remember hollyhock looking like this, you know. And anyway, we figured it out all later because we kept the little seed packets. But the other thing that was kind of a notification to me was that the deer were here way before us. And we have a lot of deer in our area. I've counted as many as 16 at one time in our backyard. And it's just like, and we didn't want to build fences. We wanted to keep everything as natural as we can. And so at the beginning of the summer, I was bragging to our nearby neighbors how my fish line fence was such a great discovery, you know, something I saw on YouTube with 40-pound test line to keep all the deer out, you know.
Did it work?
It worked. It worked. Well, I bragged about it for about a month, and then the fawns came along, and I had a horizontal line of fish line on about a 40 by 12 foot area with metal posts on the end. And so every foot, 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, I had a line of fish line. And on the end, I could undo it and get in really easy. And so when the deer initially walked into it, it was funny to watch them because it was like they were walking into a ghost, and they couldn't see it, but they could feel it. And so after a few days, they kind of got into their regular cycle, and they didn't even try to get through. But as soon as the fawns came along and were too young and dumb and newborn to know any better, they ran right through it. They go through the 1 foot and 2 foot line, then they'd be stuck inside, and they tear everything up. So
Oh, no.
after about 2 or 3 months of that, I didn't care so much anymore, and I just I let them eat all the tomatoes they wanted. I gave up. But we were talking about it. We thought, you know, next year we just grow more dahlias and flowers and things that they won't, certain types that they won't eat, and we're trying to, you know, overcome nature. I mean, that's just the way it is. And unless we're going to build big fences, we're going to have to deal with that. They were here way before us. So we're kind of at peace with that. And so now we take apples from our old place and we actually feed the deer. So.
Yeah.
When we took all the fences down, because we didn't like the way they looked, they weren't natural.
Yeah,
So
the fish line.
the fish line, yeah. Well, that's the fence.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I didn't plant as much this year because I thought, oh, this COVID's going to get over in a short time and I'll be able to get in the motor home and head out of Dodge, you know, and I didn't want to burden my neighbors again this year in watering my plants. So other than tomatoes and strawberries, that's all I planted this year. So it was a pretty easy chore, other than watering.
Our tomatoes never really got all that red. Most of them reddened up in the windowsill.
Oh, wow.
They just stayed green most of the summer.
It was kind of a cool summer.
Yeah.
Vivian has a question. She's been waiting for a bit now.
I just wanted to make an observation. When I first came to the island, I was going to be a gardener, I planted a garden and the deer ate it. I tried again and the deer ate it. And then I decided I don't want to be mad at the deer. So I'm no longer a gardener. I buy deer food from the country store and feed the deer and sit in my porch and watch them.
Don't fight it.
Yeah.
Well, they got you trained nice and thoroughly.
Yeah.
It's like living with nature, not against it. And I find myself battling that, and not trying to be possessive of raspberries against the birds, thinking I don't have to pick all the raspberries, eat them too, and that's okay. And right. Then the real issue for me is slugs. I know, I never grew up anywhere where there were slugs, and they just drive me crazy. But I just have even stopped dealing with them. I figured, what the heck, there's a purpose for them as well.
Put a pie tin out of beer.
Yeah.
Yes.
That works.
Yeah, we've done that.
Mm-hmm.
I just pick them up and throw them a far distance away.
That's what I do.
Yeah, when we were kids, we put salt on them.
That's what I do, and that's mean, but I do it anyway.
That's gotta be constant. I gotta figure out why we can't see you guys, but you can see us.
Mm. Karen, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, but go ahead, Colleen, figure that out.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know why it's doing that, but that's okay. I can see all of you guys, so there's something going on. Okay.
We
Go
can see
ahead.
you we can see you just fine right now.
Yeah, I know, but I can't see me. See, I'm not on there somewhere. So I'm somewhere on.
Your camera's.
Oh, I see where it is. Okay, there we go. Okay, I got it.
Great. Okay, Karen, what were you going to say?
Yeah.
Hang on, Nick
I'm on
was
it?
raising his hand
Okay.
just now.
Well, I wanted to just say I really appreciated this morning's session about the gardening. I am not a great gardener. I've never considered myself a great gardener, but a couple of comments. Deer really like asparagus.
Yeah. That's good to know.
Well, in the 80s, bought property on a lake in Virginia, Lake Monticello, and there was an asparagus patch that had been planted, and it came in about 3 years after we moved there. And unfortunately, we went away for a few days, and we came back, and it was all gone. So they love asparagus, and we just laughed about it. I do love asparagus also, but the deer got them first. So anyway, but I have been picking huckleberries with a friend of mine lives 3 doors up. She bought a property that had lots and lots of huckleberry vines on it, and I have huckleberries on my property also. So the two of us have been social distancing, but picking the huckleberries. She is a very, very good gardener and knows everything about making jams and doing all these things that my mother knew and I never learned. So anyway, she's tutoring me, and I'm considering it an exercise in learning better discipline, because I find it very tedious to do all these things of separating out the huckleberries from the weeds and things like that. So given this morning session, it's going to make it easier for me to be doing this work, because I'm going to, in my mind, think of it as not just an exercise in discipline, but separating out the things that I want to keep in my character and the things that I really have been trying to let go. And maybe that will help me, just as I pick out the little pieces of briars and different things that get in the huckleberries. And sometimes just the very, very immature huckleberries, green ones that can't be used. So anyway, things like procrastination and jealousy, and just other things that I would like to sort of let go and keep some of the things that I need to keep and grow in me. So those are the huckleberries. And so they're very sweet when you taste them. And I haven't decided whether we're going to make jam or whether we're going to really work over the course of the months and make huckleberry liqueur. But my friend Birgitta knows how to make the liqueur, and it's very, very good. So it would be good over a little ice cream sometime in January or February.
Huckleberry syrup is really good too.
I've got to learn more about huckleberries.
They're also delicious in muffins.
Great. Are they
Huh?
blooming right now? Or are you picking them now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, Nick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, growing up, I can remember during World War II, we had to have gardens. There was no choice.
Mhm.
Everybody was supposed to grow their own garden, and we did. And part of the reason, a big part of the reason, was you couldn't buy it in the market. You had to grow it yourself because the World War II was so disruptive. And I don't know how many of you might remember that, and some of you may not go back that far. There you go. And but what it taught me as a little kid growing up was that the world was a market, a garden, and there were many varieties and surprises. And right now, those surprises in our politics are mostly weeds, but nonetheless, we got weeds around also. And I think there's a real analogy there between gardening and life. And as we have experienced, we've traveled and lived all around the world, including 2 years in Moscow and 20 years in Malaysia. And if you want a variety of plants and seeds, there are more in Malaysia than I've seen ever any place in any other part of the world. And it's quite a learning experience. The gardens teach you things. And I learned that as a kid, and it continues to do so. So just some thoughts.
I just wanted to comment too that our neighbors who have gardens, if they have an abundance, they put a box of their fruits or vegetables or whatever up in our mailboxes for us to take, kind of like what people do at church. And it's really been nice to share the abundance this year. So.
That's a wonderful thing about this area. There is an abundance, and not neighbors sharing as well as the farm stands. I mean, in truth, we just live off grazing around farm stands as well as our garden.
Right.
It's wonderful. Well, keep thinking about garden thoughts. I'll be eager to hear more. Next week, we're going to come back to this and look at some more of the parables. And Karen, you really led well into one of the things we're going to talk about next week, and that's pruning. Pruning,
Yeah,
go to let come. And there, we all deal with that in gardening, as well as Jesus talks about it in parables. And we're going to talk about pruning. We're going to look at, let's see, preparation. How do we prepare? There are parables about preparation, and that's a big part of gardening, as well as finding rare treasures and sharing them. And so that's where I hope to go next week. And I hope that you will engage in thoughts and maybe come up with some parables yourself. What's a riddle that you can put together to share next week that you've learned from gardening? And I think you kind of started us on that, Karen, from moving to picking huckleberries to what are those things? How do I differentiate, and what can I nurture as well as let go of in my life? So cool. That's what we'll be doing next week. Any other comments or thoughts before we close? And are we okay about closing about this time, Linda?
Yeah, we're fine. You know, one thing I'm wondering is if you're going to talk about feeding your garden.
That's a part of preparation.
Okay.
This year,
I thought you'd get it. Get
yeah,
it
that's
there.
part of preparation. That this year, and I'll just glint on that. I mean, you know, I've been here for 5 years. Part of those years, I was still working full time. Now I'm retired. Not only when I do some consulting, 10 hours a week, but beyond that, the COVID just gave me time to read up on what I really should be doing, and I found got the right fertilizer for my blueberries, and boy, they have shot up this year, and all sorts of things. So yeah, we're going to talk about preparation.
For those of us that have lived in different parts of the country, gardening here is very different from gardening in Wisconsin, where we had all of that rich black soil to work with. Here you have to sift everything out of it before you can plant a seed. I know when we first built our garden, there were so many rocks and so many stones in it, and we literally had to build a sifter to get the stuff out. There was so much. But you know, gardens do take a lot of work, but the rewards are easily overshadow what you put into it.
Amen.
Amen.
Have those lessons, like you were saying, Nick, life lessons for us. And let's be thinking about what are those things that we can apply from how we do gardening to how we live our lives.
Dave, thank you so much for this morning. It was wonderful to be able to talk about something so earthy.
I've been waiting for that one.
Well, don't get your hands dirty this week. Yeah.
It's great to see all of you. I just do want to remind you that if you leave your camera on, Mark and Colleen, we can see everything you're doing. So if you don't want to be followed through the house, you might want to turn your camera off. Okay. Anyway, thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next week at 9:30. Dave is going to continue his session on gardening. Thanks for joining us.